Okay, stop scrolling and I need you to hear this. Because what I'm about to tell you about the Roloff family.
What am I gonna do?
It is not what TLC has been showing you on TV.
Crazy.
Like,
I gotta get
not
off my
even
butt
close.
and get going.
And honestly,
Anyway, how are
I've
you
been
guys
sitting on
doing
some of this for a while because I wanted to make sure I had the full picture before I said anything. But now it's all coming out whether anyone likes it or not. Because the farm that Matt Roloff built his entire identity around, the farm that Amy cried over, that the kids grew up on, that millions of fans thought represented something real and wholesome and good. That farm is at the center of one of the most painful, ugly, drawn-out family implosions I have ever seen play out in reality TV history. And the worst part? Most of it happened right in front of us. We just didn't know what we were watching. Let's talk about it. So first, real quick, if you're new here and you don't know what Little People Big World is, here's the 30-second version. It's a TLC reality show that's been running since 2006. It follows Matt and Amy Roloff, a couple with dwarfism, raising their 4 kids on a beautiful 109-acre farm in Helvetia, Oregon. It became one of TLC's longest-running shows. People loved this family. Like, genuinely loved them. They felt real. They felt relatable. Matt was the scrappy entrepreneur dad always building something. Amy was the heart of the home. The kids were funny and awkward and sweet. For years. This show was feel-good television at its finest. But here's the thing about feel-good television. Somebody's always feeling bad behind the camera. Let me take you back to 2016 because that's really where the cracks started showing in a big, public, impossible-to-ignore way. Matt and Amy announced they were divorcing. Now, look, divorces happen. Nobody's judging. But the way this divorce went down and everything that came after it started pulling back the curtain on a family dynamic that was way more complicated than any episode of the show ever let on. The farm was always supposed to be this shared legacy thing, right? Matt built it. Amy lived there, raised her kids there, poured herself into it. It was theirs. Except, it was never really theirs equally. And that became a very big, very expensive, very emotionally devastating problem. See, Matt has always been the one who technically owned and operated Roloff Farms. He was the visionary, the builder, the guy who turned a regular piece of land into a pumpkin patch tourist destination with a castle, a pirate ship, and more random structures than most small theme parks. And that's genuinely impressive. I'm not gonna take that away from him. But Amy was the one who held the actual family together. She was the one doing the school pickups and the dinners and the homework help and the emotional labor that never makes it onto a highlight reel. And when the marriage ended, she suddenly found herself in this awful position, fighting for a fair share of something she dedicated her entire adult life to, but didn't have equal legal claim to that tension. That became the slow-burning fuse for everything that blew up later. But here's where it gets interesting. Like, really interesting. After the divorce was finalized, Matt started dating Karen Chandler. Now, Karen wasn't some random woman. She was the farm's manager. She had been working on Roloff Farms for years. Years during which Matt and Amy were still married. Let me just let that sit there for a second. The woman Matt ended up with had been working on the family farm while he was still with Amy. Now, to be clear, neither Matt nor Karen have ever confirmed there was any overlap or anything inappropriate happening before the divorce. They've denied it. And we're not here to make accusations. But you can imagine how Amy felt. You can imagine how the kids felt. And you can absolutely imagine how it felt for Amy to eventually have to leave the farm, the home she built her life in, and watch Karen essentially step into it. That's not petty drama. That's genuinely painful stuff. And the kids? Oh, we'll get to the kids. Because that is where this whole thing really detonates. Zach, Jeremy, Molly, and Jacob. 4 kids. 4 completely different relationships with this farm, this family, and this whole situation. Molly basically disappeared. And I mean that respectfully. She made the decision early on to step away from the spotlight. She lives a pretty private life. She's rarely on the show anymore, and honestly, she might be the smartest one in the family for it. No shade. Just observation. Jacob, the youngest, is a whole separate chapter we need to get into because his story takes a turn that most casual fans completely missed. He left the show, he wrote a book, He said some things about his childhood that raised some very serious eyebrows, and then something happened that I genuinely did not see coming. We'll get there. But the two that became the center of the farm drama, the ones whose relationship with their dad got aired out in the most public and painful way possible, were Jeremy and Zach. And this is the part that broke a lot of fans' hearts. Because for a long time, Jeremy and Zach seemed like the future of Roloff Farms. Matt always talked about keeping it in the family. He used to say things on camera like, "I hope one of the boys takes this over someday." It was practically a running theme on the show. The fans believed it. The boys believed it, and then Matt sold part of the farm to strangers. I want to make sure you understand what happened here, because the timeline matters. In 2022, Matt listed a portion of Roloff Farms for sale. Now, he had already sold Amy her own separate property. She moved into a house nearby, which was part of their divorce settlement. But this was different. This was Matt deciding to sell off a chunk of the actual farm. The pumpkin patch, the iconic stuff, and offering it to his sons first. Zach and Jeremy both reportedly expressed interest. They wanted to buy it. They wanted to keep it in the family. And why wouldn't they? This was their childhood. Their legacy. Their name. But here's where it gets messy, the asking price and the terms. According to what's been reported and what both Zach and Jeremy have said publicly, including on the show, it felt like Matt wasn't exactly bending over backward to make it work for his own kids. Like, the deal he was offering them wasn't the family discount you might expect. It was closer to market value. Which, fine, business is business. But when you've spent years telling your sons, this will be yours someday, and then you price them out of it, that's not just a business decision. That's a betrayal. That's the word Zach used, by the way. Not me. Zach on camera to his father's face. Now here's what I haven't told you yet. There are people who were close to this family. Not cast members, not producers, but people who were there, who say that what happened with the farm sale was actually the third or fourth major blow-up in a series of family conflicts that the show either glossed over completely or edited out entirely. Conflicts that go back years further than most fans realize. And one of those conflicts involves something that happened with Jacob Roloff that TLC did not want to become public knowledge. We're going to get into that. But first, I need to tell you about Karen, because her role in all of this is way bigger than just Matt's girlfriend. Way bigger. And I think some of you are going to be genuinely surprised by what the people closest to this situation have said about her influence on Matt's decisions. Stay with me, because here's the thing about this family, and I mean this, the farm was never just land. It was the whole metaphor. It was the thing that held them together when everything else was falling apart. And when Matt started making decisions about it, that felt to his kids like he was choosing something else. Someone else. Over them. That's when the text threads went quiet. That's when the holiday dinners got weird. That's when sources started talking. And that's exactly where we're going next. Part 2 is where the real secrets start coming out, including one that involves TLC putting pressure on the family to keep something off camera that absolutely should have been addressed publicly. And once you hear it, you're gonna understand why Jacob Roloff walked away from this show and never looked back. Don't go anywhere. Okay, so I left you on a cliffhanger, and I know. You've been thinking about it. Let's not waste any time. Jacob Roloff, the youngest kid. The quiet one. The one who used to seem kind of sulky and disconnected on the show when he was a teenager, and a lot of fans wrote him off as just being a moody kid. Which, sure, he was a teenager on a reality TV show. That would make anyone moody. But there was something else going on that none of us fully understood at the time. In 2020, Jacob posted something on Instagram that stopped a lot of people cold. He came forward and said that he had been sexually abused as a child, specifically by a producer who worked on Little People, Big World. Let that land, a producer. On the show. Abusing one of the children being filmed for that show. He named the person. The accusation was specific. And Jacob was very clear that he had previously disclosed this to adults in his life and felt like it had not been handled the way it should have been. Now TLC released a statement. The accused individual was no longer working with the network. There was no criminal charge filed at the time, partly because of statute of limitations issues depending on jurisdiction. And the story kind of moved on. The way stories like this do sometimes. Too fast. Way too fast. But what Jacob said in follow-up posts and interviews about the experience of being a child on reality television, about the loss of privacy, about the way cameras in your home reshape your sense of self, about feeling like you couldn't say no. That's the stuff that should have made the entire country stop and ask harder questions about how we make these shows. It didn't. Not really. And the fact that it didn't. That's partly on TLC. And it's partly on all of us. I want to be careful here because this is real trauma we're talking about, not just drama for drama's sake. Jacob Roloff is a real person who went through something genuinely terrible, and I think the way the media covered his story, or mostly didn't cover it, says a lot about how we treat reality TV kids as characters rather than human beings. But here's what's relevant to our story about the family fracture. Jacob's experience, and the way it was handled or not handled, became another fault line in the family. Because when you're processing something like that, you need your people to show up for you in full. And by multiple accounts, the family's response was complicated, fractured. Some members were more publicly supportive than others. And Jacob, who had already distanced himself from the show by this point, pulled even further back. He wrote a book. He moved away from Oregon. He started building a life that looked almost nothing like the one he grew up in on camera. And honestly, reading between the lines of his public statements, it feels like someone who needed to completely rebuild their identity from scratch after spending their childhood as a commodity. That's heavy. And it matters to the larger story here because it's one more thread in this web of family pain that the show's cheerful pumpkin harvest editing never fully captured. Okay, now let's talk about Karen Chandler. Because I promised you, and I keep my promises. So look, Karen gets a lot of hate online, and I think some of it is genuinely unfair. She didn't break up a happy marriage. Matt and Amy had problems that predated her entirely. Amy has actually said as much in interviews. She's been pretty gracious about acknowledging that the marriage had run its course. But, what fans and even some family insiders have pointed to is the way Karen's presence shifted Matt's priorities and decision-making in ways that had real consequences for his kids. Here's a specific thing that got pointed out on fan forums and then kind of picked up by some entertainment reporters in multiple episodes. You can see a dynamic where Karen is in the room or involved in conversations that feel like they should be private family moments. She's not just Matt's girlfriend hanging in the background. She's present for some of the harder discussions. About the farm. About the kids' futures. About money. And Zach has made comments, carefully worded, but pretty clear, about feeling like the conversations he needed to have with his dad kept happening with Karen in the room. Or with Karen's fingerprints on the decisions afterward. Now, is that fair to Karen? Maybe not entirely. Matt is a grown adult who makes his own choices. But when you're already grieving the loss of your family's original structure, and you feel like an outsider has a seat at the table for decisions that directly affect your inheritance, your future, your connection to the only home you've ever known, that doesn't feel good. It doesn't matter how nice the other person is, and here's what I want you to hold on to for a second, because we're going to come back to this. There are reports, and again, not verified on record, but from multiple separate sources who've talked to entertainment reporters, that one of the biggest points of contention between Matt and Zach wasn't actually about the money at all. It was about what happens to the farm after Matt. Like, long term. Will it still be Roloff Farms? Will it stay in the family name? Will the grandkids grow up on it? There were apparently conversations and disagreements about what Matt's long-term plans actually are, and what Zach believed those plans were versus what Matt's actual intentions turned out to be. Those two things were apparently very different. I'll get into the specifics of what's been reported in a minute. But first, Jeremy. Because Jeremy Roloff's exit from this whole situation is so different from Zach's, and it kind of tells you everything about how two brothers who grew up in the same house can end up processing the same grief in completely opposite ways. Jeremy and Zach are twins. Fraternal twins, but they grew up incredibly close. Shared rooms, shared experiences, shared the weird pressure of being the oldest boys in a family that was literally a television show. But somewhere along the way, and this happened gradually, you can almost track it season by season if you go back and watch, Jeremy started pulling away from the whole Roloff Farms identity in a different way than Zach did. Jeremy found religion. Like, genuinely, deeply found it, not in a casual way. He and his wife Audrey became very involved in a pretty conservative Christian community, started a lifestyle brand and podcast called Behind the Scenes and later The Beating Heart, wrote books together, and built this whole separate platform and identity that was kind of distinct from the show. And here's the interesting thing about Jeremy. By the time the farm drama really escalated, Jeremy had already emotionally divested from the idea of owning it. He'd moved away from Oregon. He and Audrey were building their life elsewhere. So when Matt sold that portion of the farm, Jeremy's reaction was more sadness, disappointment, but not the raw wound that it was for Zach, who had actually been trying to make a deal happen. Zach was ready to plant roots. Zach had moved back to Oregon with his wife Tori and their kids specifically because he thought the farm might be part of their future. And then it wasn't. And Jeremy watched from a distance and probably felt his own complicated feelings about it, but he wasn't the one who had to have that awful conversation with their dad on camera. That was Zach's burden. I keep coming back to Tori, honestly. Because Tori Roloff, Zach's wife, has been remarkably open about how much this whole situation affected her. She's spoken on her own platforms about feeling blindsided, about her kids, who, by the way, have dwarfism like their grandfather and their dad, being denied a connection to this farm that she thought would be their birthright. And there's something about that specific detail that just guts me. Like, imagine telling your kid about this place. This magical farm with the pumpkins and the castle and the stories. Your grandpa built all of this. This is your history, your legacy. You belong here. And then watching the door close. Tora has never said anything hateful or publicly vicious about Matt. She's been measured. But the hurt is there if you read carefully. And the hurt of your children not having access to something that was supposed to be theirs? That's not a wound that heals quickly, okay? Here's where I need to slow down and make sure you're tracking with me, because what I'm about to get into in the next section is the part that I genuinely think TLC does not want discussed. It's about how much of this family conflict was known to producers, and when they knew it. Because there's a pretty compelling argument to be made that TLC was aware of significant family tension well before it showed up on screen, and that they made deliberate decisions about what to film, what to air, what to ask the family members about during confessionals, and most importantly, what to bury. Reality TV producers are not passive observers. They're architects. They shape the story. They decide who's the hero and who's the villain, and they do it through 1,000 tiny editorial decisions that you never see because you're just watching the finished product. And when I tell you about some of the specific decisions that people allege were made in the production of this show, what was kept in, what was cut out, and what was actively steered away from, you're going to have a whole new way of watching Little People, Big World. Or maybe you're never going to be able to watch it the same way again. We're getting into that. Right after this, let me ask you something real quick. Have you ever watched a reality show and thought, wait, something's missing? Like the edit doesn't quite add up? There's a reaction that doesn't match the conversation before it, or someone's crying and you have absolutely no context for why, or two people who were clearly having a huge fight suddenly seem totally fine and nobody mentions it. Yeah, that's not accidental. That's a choice. And Little People, Big World, for all its warmth and all its authenticity, was still a produced, edited, packaged television product. And TLC had a very specific version of the Roloff family that they wanted to sell to America: happy, quirky, wholesome, resilient, a little messy sometimes, but fundamentally good people working through things together. That version of the Roloffs? It sold advertising. It kept viewers coming back season after season. It made TLC money for nearly 2 decades. The actual version of the Roloffs, the one with the legal disputes and the estranged relationships, and the child who was abused by a member of the production team, and the sons who felt cheated out of their birthright, that version was a liability. So what do you do with a liability? You manage it. You minimize it. You put it in a box and hope nobody looks too hard. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough when it comes to reality TV families: the contracts. The Roloffs, like all TLC talent, operated under agreements that gave the network significant control over their image, their public statements, and what could be discussed on and off camera. This is pretty standard for reality TV, but what it means in practice is that family members often can't speak freely about conflicts involving the show or each other, at least not without potential legal and contractual consequences. So when you watch Matt and Amy carefully dancing around certain topics on camera, when you notice the kids giving very vague answers to pretty pointed questions from producers, when someone says it's complicated and then the scene just cuts, that's not them being evasive because they're private people. That's them navigating a legal and contractual minefield in real time while cameras are rolling. And that changes how you read everything. Because the stuff that did make it to air, the arguments, the tears, the pointed silences, that's what leaked through despite the system designed to keep it contained. Imagine what didn't leak through. Let me give you a specific example of what I mean. The farm sale conversation between Matt and Zach, the one I mentioned in part 1 where Zach used the word betrayal, that was uncomfortable television. Really uncomfortable. And it aired. But here's the question, why did it air? Not to be cynical, but that level of raw family conflict doesn't accidentally make it to broadcast on a network like TLC. Someone made a decision to put that in the episode. And you have to ask yourself, why then? Why that moment? My read? By that point, the relationship between Matt and Zach had deteriorated enough that there was no saving the happy family narrative. The fans had already started to notice things. Zach and Tori had moved away from Oregon to Washington State, and fans were asking questions on social media. The story was going to come out one way or another. So TLC did what smart networks do. They got in front of it. They aired the conflict on their terms, in the frame they chose, with the narrative context they controlled. Matt got to be the complicated patriarch making a tough business decision. Zach got to be the emotional son who maybe wanted something that wasn't realistic. And the actual, deeper, messier truth of what had been building for years? Still mostly off-screen, and I want to take a second here because I think there's a version of this story where Matt Roloff is a straight-up villain, and I don't actually think that's true. And I say that as someone who's pretty clearly been on the son's side of this whole thing. Matt Roloff is a complicated person. He grew up with dwarfism at a time when that came with very real obstacles and prejudices. He built something genuinely remarkable. A business, a home, a platform, a career, through sheer force of will and a kind of relentless creative energy that his kids clearly inherited. He is, by most accounts, genuinely charming and genuinely loves his family. But he also seems to be someone who struggles with the emotional side of relationships, who communicates better through projects than through conversations, who maybe uses business logic as a way to avoid the vulnerability of just saying, "I'm sorry. I should have done this differently. You deserve better from me." And those kinds of people, the builders, the visionaries, the relentless doers, they're often incredible at creating things and genuinely bad at maintaining the human connections those things are supposed to be for. The farm is a perfect example. Matt built this extraordinary place and put everything into it. But somewhere along the way, the farm became more important than what it was supposed to represent. And the people he built it for felt that. But let's talk about Amy for a minute because I feel like she gets lost in the shuffle of this narrative, and she absolutely shouldn't. Amy Roloff has had one of the most quietly impressive character arcs in reality television history, and I don't think she gets enough credit for it. She went through a very public divorce. She had to leave a home she'd lived in for decades. She watched her ex-husband's new relationship become part of the show she was still filming. She processed all of that grief on camera. And through all of it, she managed to come out the other side looking like a genuinely whole, happy, put-together person. She remarried Chris Merrick, and they seem legitimately happy in a way that feels real and grounded. She moved into a new home. She built a new life. But here's the thing about Amy that I think is important to this story. She has been notably quiet about the farm sale and the conflict between Matt and Zach. Like, specifically and carefully quiet. She said she has her own feelings about it. She said she understands why it's painful. But she's been very measured about not publicly picking sides. And there are two ways to read that. 1. Amy has done the work, she's at peace, and she's genuinely trying not to inflame things further for the sake of her kids and her grandkids. 2. Amy knows things. Things she's not allowed to say. Things that, if she said them, would blow this whole situation open in a way that nobody is prepared for. I lean toward option 1, honestly. But I've seen enough of this show to know that Amy Roloff is sharper and more self-aware than she often gets credit for. And the things she doesn't say are sometimes as loud as the things she does. Can we talk about the fans for a second? Because the fan community around this show has had its own implosion, and it mirrors the family drama in really interesting ways. Little people, big world fan groups, Facebook groups, Reddit threads, comment sections, used to be this warm, supportive place where people talked about how much the show meant to them. People with dwarfism who saw themselves represented on mainstream television. People who just liked the Roloffs and felt like they knew them. And those spaces have become something else. Team Matt versus Team Zach debates that get genuinely vicious. People who've decided Karen is the villain of this story and will not be moved. Jeremy fans who feel like he got unfairly pushed out of the spotlight. Jacob supporters who think the whole family needs to publicly reckon with what he went through. Amy defenders who think she's been done dirty from day one. It's messy. It's tribal. And it's a fascinating reflection of what happens when a family's pain becomes public property, which is exactly what reality television does to people. You stop being a person and you start being a character, and the audience feels entitled to have opinions about your choices because they've been watching you for 15 years and they feel like they know you. They don't. Nobody does. That's the whole sad irony. But here's what brought me down this rabbit hole in the first place. And here's what I've been slowly building toward since part 1. There is a specific piece of information, something that's been floated in entertainment reporting circles, something that people with close connections to the production have hinted at without going fully on record, about a decision Matt made regarding the farm's future that goes beyond just the sale. It involves what's reportedly in his plans for the property long term. And it involves a name that is not Roloff. Now I want to be clear, this is not confirmed. This is reported. This is the kind of thing that exists in the space between verified fact and persistent rumor, and I'm not going to present it as gospel truth. But the consistency with which multiple sources seem to be pointing in the same direction is interesting, to say the least. And if it's true, it would explain a lot about why Zach and Jeremy and Tori all seem to be grieving something that technically hasn't fully happened yet. Because sometimes you don't have to wait for the door to close completely to know that it's been decided. Sometimes the writing is on the wall months, years before the thing actually happens. And maybe, the Roloff boys could see the writing before most of us even knew to look. We're getting into that in part 4. Along with something that Tori Roloff posted online that didn't get nearly enough attention when it happened. A post that, when you know what to look for, reads like a goodbye. Don't go anywhere. Because the thing that's coming next? I didn't expect it either. Okay, I'm gonna be honest with you. This part got to me a little. I've been covering celebrity drama for a while. I'm used to the manufactured stuff. The publicity stunts. The feuds that exist mainly to promote an album, or a tour, or a new TV season. I've got a pretty good radar for what's real and what's performance. The Tori Roloff thing? That was real. In the fall. I'm not going to pin down an exact date because the context matters more than the calendar. Tori posted something on her social media that she probably thought would be understood as just a personal reflection. A little emotional, but not a big statement. Just processing something out loud the way people do on Instagram. It was about change. About letting go of things you love. About trusting that the good memories don't disappear just because the place they happened in has moved on. And most people who saw it probably read it as general life stuff. Nostalgic. Soft. Sweet even. But if you were paying attention, if you knew about the farm sale, about Zach and Matt's conflict, about the move to Washington, about all of it, it read completely differently. It read like someone saying goodbye to the farm. Not in a dramatic, door-slamming way. In the quiet way that actually hurts more. The way you say goodbye when you finally accepted that something isn't yours anymore, even though it was supposed to be. And listen, I'm not trying to project onto Tori. She hasn't confirmed that's what the post was about. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. But I've been watching people process loss long enough to recognize what it looks like when someone's made peace with something they didn't want to make peace with. Tori Roloff married into this family. She married Zach, yes, but she also married the farm. She married the legacy. She married the idea of her kids growing up in the same pumpkin patch their dad grew up in, riding the same tractor, celebrating the same Halloween traditions. She's talked about this on camera and in interviews. She loves Roloff Farms. Not in a possessive way, in a genuinely emotional, it means something to me way. And now her kids live in Washington. And the part of the farm that was supposed to be their future belongs to someone else. That's grief. Real, actual grief. And it happened to real people. So what I asked the future of Roloff Farms? Here's what we actually know, stripped of speculation. Matt still owns a significant portion of the property. He continues to run the pumpkin season operations. He and Karen appear to be stable and happy. The show is continued in some form, though the cast and structure have shifted significantly as the kids have aged out or stepped back. What's been reported, and Matt himself has kind of hinted at in interviews without being super specific, is that he's thinking about his legacy. About what happens to this place when he eventually steps back from running it. And the picture that seems to be emerging from those hints is one where Roloff Farms becomes something more commercial. More of a true destination business. Less of a family farm in the sentimental sense. Which is not necessarily wrong. It's his land. He built it. He gets to decide. But it does close a door. Permanently. On a version of the future that his sons thought they were going to walk into. And here's the thing about closed doors. Once they're closed, the relationship that existed on the other side of them changes. Forever. You can still love someone. You can still have holidays together and hug and mean it. But the thing you thought you were building toward together, that's gone. And you both know it. And you have to figure out who you are to each other now that the shared dream is off the table. That's where the Roloffs are. Right now. In real time. I want to zoom out for just a second because I think there's something worth saying about why this story hits the way it hits for so many people. The Roloffs aren't royalty. They're not billionaires. They're not Hollywood royalty. They're a family from Oregon who happened to have a TV show for a very long time. But the reason people care, the reason you're still watching this video right now, is because their story is weirdly universal. The divorced parents. The complicated relationship with money and legacy. The kids who grew up and realized their parents were flawed humans. The new partner who changes the family dynamic in ways everyone's still adjusting to. The thing you thought you'd inherit and didn't. How many of you have a version of that story in your own family? How many of you have a grandparent's house or a family business or just a tradition, something that felt like it was supposed to continue, and then it didn't? And you had to grieve something that nobody outside your family would fully understand because to the rest of the world it looks small, but to you it was everything. That's the Roloff farm. That's what this is. It's a 109-acre piece of land in Oregon. And it's also everything that was supposed to be true about a family. And watching that fall apart, even slowly, even partially, even through the carefully managed lens of a reality TV show, it lands somewhere real. Here's what I keep coming back to. Matt Roloff is, by his own description, a builder. It's the core of his identity. He built the farm. He built the business. He built the show. He built platforms and structures and attractions and, in his mind, a legacy. But the one thing you can't build is trust that's already been broken. You can't construct your way back into your son's confidence once he stood in front of you on camera and said you betrayed him. You can't add another feature to the pumpkin patch that makes your daughter-in-law feel like her kids belong there. You can build the most beautiful farm in Oregon. You can have a thriving business and a happy new relationship and a full life. And your family can still feel like strangers to you at Christmas. That's the real story. Not the sale price. Not the acreage. Not the contracts or the TLC cameras or the social media posts. The real story is a father and his sons who love each other and can't quite find the path back to each other. And I don't know if they will. I genuinely don't know, though. Here we are. If you've made it this far, thank you. Like, genuinely. This wasn't a light topic, and you stayed with me through all of it, and I appreciate that more than you know. I want to know what you think. Because this is one of those situations where reasonable people can look at the same facts and come to completely different conclusions. Is Matt the villain here? Is he just a complicated person making complicated choices? Do you think Zach and Jeremy had a legitimate claim to the farm, or is it Matt's land to do what he wants with? And what about Jacob? Do you think the family has truly reckoned with what he went through, or is there more unfinished business there? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if you've got a family story that this reminded you of, I really do want to hear it. Because sometimes the best part of making these videos isn't the drama. It's finding out that other people get it. Hit subscribe if you're not already here. I'm covering the Roloff story as it continues to develop, and trust me, it is still developing. There are pieces of this that haven't fully played out yet. And when they do, you'll hear it here first. See you in the next one. You know what's funny? I went back and watched the very first episode of Little People, Big World recently. Like, the pilot. 2006. And there's this moment where Matt is standing on the farm. The land is still kind of rough, still being developed, and he's talking to the camera about what he wants this place to become. And he's got this look on his face. That builder's look. That, I can see it even though it's not there yet look, and he says something like, I'm paraphrasing, he says he wants this farm to be a place where his kids and his grandkids can always come home to. Always. I had to pause it, because sitting here in 2025, knowing everything that's happened, knowing where Zach's kids are growing up, knowing how the farm sale went down, knowing the silence that's apparently settled between certain members of this family, that clip hit different. Like, really different. And it made me ask a question that I don't think enough people are asking about this whole situation. What happens to the grandkids in all of this? Because here's the thing. When we talk about the Roloff family drama, we focus, understandably, on the adults. Matt, Amy, Zach, Jeremy, Tori, Karen. The relationships, the conflicts, the farm sale, the contracts. That's the visible stuff. That's the stuff that makes it onto camera or into the comment sections or into entertainment reporting. But there are children in this story. Zach and Tori have 3 kids, Jackson, Lila, and Josie. All 3 of them have been on the show at various points. Jackson and Lila were both diagnosed with achondroplasia, the same form of dwarfism that runs through the Roloff family. And they are, by every account, by everything you see on camera and off, genuinely wonderful kids being raised by 2 parents who clearly adore them, and those kids were supposed to grow up connected to Roloff farms. That was the plan. That was the thing Tori and Zach were moving toward when they talked about staying in Oregon, about being close to the farm, about raising the next generation on that land. And now they live in Washington, and the farm belongs, in part, to people who are not Roloffs. Jackson is old enough to understand some of this. Not all of it, not the financial and legal stuff, but kids understand more than we give them credit for. He knows the farm. He's been on camera there since he was born. He knows it's Grandpa Matt's place. He knows his dad grew up there. What does it feel like to be that kid, watching the adults in your life navigate this? What questions is he asking? What stories is he already telling himself about what happened and why? I think about that more than I probably should. Jeremy and Audrey have kids too, Ember, Bode, and Radley. And their relationship with the farm drama is interesting from a completely different angle. Because Jeremy, as I mentioned before, had already emotionally separated from the idea of inheriting the farm before the sale happened. His life, his identity, his career, it's all built around something independent of the Roloff Farms brand now. He and Audrey have their own platform, their own audience, their own thing going. So his kids are growing up in a family that's made a pretty clean break from the show and from the farm in terms of daily life. They're not being raised with the expectation of that land being theirs someday. Which means they probably don't carry the same specific grief about it that Jackson and Lila might eventually carry. But here's what's interesting, and I don't think this is talked about enough. Jeremy's very public pivot toward a specific kind of conservative Christian lifestyle and values has created its own kind of distance from certain members of his family. It's subtle. Nobody's come out and said there's a values conflict explicitly. But if you follow both Jeremy and Audrey's content and, say, Jacob and Isabel's content? These are not people who seem to be in the same world anymore. Jacob and his wife Isabel are pretty openly progressive. Isabel has talked candidly about faith deconstruction, about leaving behind religious frameworks that felt constraining, about building a different kind of spiritual life. Jeremy and Audrey's entire brand is built around a traditional Christian marriage and family model. Neither of those things is wrong. People get to believe what they believe. But when you've got siblings who've gone in those directions, family dinners get complicated. The things you can talk about shrink. The space between you widens, not because of any one fight, but just because you're living in different worlds now. And that distance? That's another kind of loss that doesn't make the highlight reel, okay? I've been holding something back and I think it's time. There's a pattern in how the Roloff family conflicts have played out publicly that I find really, genuinely fascinating from a media and psychology perspective. And it tells you something important about which members of this family are still playing the game and which ones have stepped off the board entirely. Here's what I mean. When Matt does something that creates conflict, the farm sale, decisions about Karen's role, whatever, the family members who are still connected to the show or to TLC handle it in a very specific way. They're careful. They express feelings without making accusations. They say things like, "It was hurtful," or "I felt left out," rather than "he did something wrong." They cry on camera, but they don't name names in ways that could trigger legal issues or contract violations. It's managed grief. And it's managed for a reason. But then there's Jacob. Jacob, who left the show. Jacob, who wrote a book. Jacob, who has no TLC contract to protect. Jacob, who named the person who abused him and did not soften it or frame it carefully. Jacob, who has been pretty clear in various public statements about his complicated feelings regarding his family, his childhood, and the institution of reality television. Jacob says the things the others can't. Or won't. And that makes him simultaneously the most credible voice in this family story and the most uncomfortable one. Because what he says doesn't have a PR filter. It doesn't have a producer sitting behind the camera, gently steering the conversation. It's just him. Speaking. And a lot of fans don't know how to hold that. Because Jacob doesn't fit the narrative they've been sold about this family. He never really did. Jacob wrote a memoir called Out to the Farm. And look, it did not get the mainstream coverage it deserved. Not even close. In it, he talks about his experience growing up on reality television. About the loss of privacy. About the psychological effects of having cameras in your home from the time you're a young child. About the way it shapes your identity when you're not just a kid, you're a character. A product. A thing people watch and form opinions about and feel entitled to comment on. He writes about his relationship with faith and how it evolved. About finding his own way outside the framework he was raised in. About his relationship with his family. Complicated, loving, real. And he writes, obliquely but clearly enough if you're reading carefully, about the ways that certain things that should have been addressed weren't. Certain protections that should have existed didn't. Certain conversations that should have happened never did. It's not a hateful book. It's not a takedown. But it is an honest one. And here's the thing that kills me about how it was received. A lot of the discourse around it in the Little People, Big World fan community was about whether Jacob was being fair to his family. Whether he was being too negative. Whether he was taking things out of context. Not about whether what he was describing was true. Not about what it means that a child who grew up on a family reality show felt unsafe and unprotected and later came forward to say so. The focus was on whether he was being a good son. Think about that. I need to say something here and I want to say it carefully because I mean it. The Roloff family, all of them, Matt included, are human beings who made a choice to put their lives on television. And in exchange for that choice, they got money and platform and fame and the ability to reach millions of people and tell their story. But they also gave up something enormous that you can't fully understand until it's gone, the right to just be a family privately. Every hard moment they've ever had has been content. Every fight, every tear, every awkward silence, every milestone and heartbreak, it's all been packaged and sold and discussed by strangers online who feel like they have a stake in it. And the kids? They didn't choose that. Not really. Not in any meaningful way. They were born into it or too young to understand what they were agreeing to. And the costs of that, for Jacob especially, but in different ways for all of them, are costs that are still being paid. Right now. In real time. The farm drama, the family fracture, the estrangements and distances and silences, these don't exist in a vacuum. They exist at the end of a 20-year chain of choices and consequences that started with a camera crew showing up on a family farm in Oregon and never fully leaving. I'm not saying the show caused all of this. I'm saying the show didn't help. And the network that benefited the most from this family's pain, they've never once had to reckon with what they took. That bothers me. It should bother you too, but okay. Let me come back down to earth for a second because I don't want this to turn into a TED Talk about the ethics of reality television, even though honestly that conversation needs to happen more. There's something developing right now, like current, recent, in the Roloff orbit that adds a whole new layer to this story. Zach and Tori have been doing a lot of content on their own platforms. Social media, some podcast appearances, that kind of thing. And something interesting has started happening in the way they talk about their life. They're not talking about the farm anymore. Not the way they used to. Before the sale, before the move, Tori especially would talk about Oregon, about the farm, about the dream of raising their kids there. It was woven into everything. Now she talks about Washington. About their new house. About community they're building there. About roots. New roots. And that sounds simple. That sounds like just moving on. But here's what makes it significant. The shift happened fast. Faster than grief usually resolves. And it happened around the same time that sources close to the family started indicating, very carefully, very indirectly, that Zach and Tori had received some information about Matt's long-term plans for the farm that made any lingering hope of a family reunion on that land feel final. What information? That's the question I keep running up against. Nobody's going fully on record. But the consistency of the implication, across multiple separate people who have talked to reporters and bloggers covering this family, is that whatever Zach and Tori found out, it settled something for them. It closed a door they might have been leaving slightly open. And once that door closes, you stop standing near it. You build a life somewhere else. There's a moment in one of the more recent seasons where Matt is walking the farm. Just him. No family around, and he's talking to the camera about what the land means to him. And he talks about legacy. About building something that lasts. And I remember watching it and feeling two things at the same time. One, admiring the genuine love he has for that place. It's real. You can see it. Two, feeling this deep, sad awareness that the people he built it for are watching from somewhere else now. Legacy is a funny thing. You can build something enormous, something beautiful, something that outlasts you, and still lose the thing that was supposed to make it matter. Matt Roloff built a farm. He might have lost his family in the process. Or maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the relationships repair. Maybe the grandkids grow up knowing each other. Maybe there are Christmases that aren't strained and summers on the farm that bring people back together. I hope so. I genuinely do. But right now, from everything that's visible, the distance is real. And distance has a way of becoming permanent if nobody crosses it first. So here's where I'm leaving you with part 5. We've gone through the farm sale, the divorce fallout, the Karen situation, Jacob's story, TLC's editorial control, Tori's grief, the grandkids caught in the middle, the values divide between the siblings. The things that got said on camera and the things that didn't. The things that were known and buried. The door that quietly closed. And I want to ask you something honest. Who do you hold responsible for where this family ended up? Because it's easy to make Matt the villain. It's easy. And he's made choices that clearly hurt his kids. But is he the only one responsible for how this played out? What about TLC? What about 20 years of using a family as content without being accountable for what that does to people? What about us, the viewers? Who tuned in season after season and made this worth doing financially? Who argued in comment sections about who was right and who was wrong as if these were fictional characters? I'm including myself in that. I've watched this show. I've formed opinions about these people. And now I'm making content about their pain. The discomfort I feel about that is real. Leave me your thoughts in the comments. I'm serious. I want to know where you land on this. Because this story isn't over. Not even close. There are parts of this we haven't gotten to yet, including what's reportedly happening with the show itself, whether another season is even possible given where the family relationships are, and what Matt and Karen's future on the farm actually looks like now that the dust has started to settle. Part 6 is coming. And I promise you, the thing I'm saving for Part 6 is the piece of the story that I genuinely wasn't sure I should include. The piece that, when I found out about it, made me sit back and just go quiet for a minute. It's not a rumor. It's documented. And it changes the frame on everything I've told you so far. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Because once I put it out there, you can't unknow it. And trust me, you're going to want to know it. See you in Part 6.